right, we are on. Thanks everybody for joining us. Welcome, good morning. I'm very excited to be here for our next iteration of the Cred webinar series. We are here with co-founder and CEO of OfferUp, Nick Huzar. Nick, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. So Nick's going to talk about how to keep perspective during COVID-19, some of the struggles he's faced based on his experience, both before and while founding OfferUp. He's also going to cover the importance of keeping perspective, how to stay scrappy, and visualizing our country's future, and also how businesses can make their mark within it. So a little bit more about Nick. As I mentioned, he's the co-founder and CEO of OfferUp, a Seattle-based unicorn and the largest mobile marketplace for local buyers and sellers in the US. As a new father, he realized a massive opportunity in the marketplace where he needed to sell his belongings to make room for his newborn with very limited online options. A pioneer in reinventing local commerce, Nick revolutionized the industry and launched OfferUp in 2011 to create the simplest, most trustworthy way for people to buy and sell in their communities. With more than 90 million downloads, OfferUp has become a top 3 lifestyle shopping app in the US with 44 million annual users. Nick holds a BA in Management Information Systems from Washington State University. Earlier this year, OfferUp announced its $120 million investment led by OLX and its acquisition of LetGo, which we're going to talk a little bit more about later today. Again, thanks everyone for joining us. If you are joining us, we'd love for you to drop in the attendee chat where you're calling in from, where you're listening in from. We're going to make this as interactive as possible. So I'm going to be asking Nick some questions for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to leave it the last 15 minutes for some audience Q&A. So please make sure you drop in your questions throughout the interview in the chat so we can get to them at the end. We want to make sure that we answer all of your questions about, again, keeping perspective, Nick's role as an entrepreneur and all of his experience that he has gone through with OfferUp and before, and anything else you want to know about the OfferUp platform. So please drop in your questions. We're going to go ahead and get started. So first, Nick, a little bit about the origin story. For anyone who isn't familiar, can you tell us a little bit more about OfferUp?
For sure. Yeah, so I think you summed it up in the beginning fairly well. For me, the spark of OfferUp happened when my wife told me, "Hey, I'm pregnant," and I was just so ecstatic, and I had a room full of stuff, and we bought this house with plans on having children, but I just dumped stuff in there. We never used it. But I remember standing in the doorway and thinking to myself, this is going to take me forever to try to sell, everything in this room. Why can't there be a better way? And I think that's like most new ideas. They're usually a personal pain point that somebody feels. And in this case, it was me. And so, I didn't jump in right away. I said, am I alone in this? Am I seeing something that others maybe don't see? And again, I looked at, I think it was the 2nd gen iPhone. So there wasn't even an Android phone when we started actually coding on the initial OfferUp app. But selfishly, I just, again, in the beginning was just building a product for myself. Like I really just wanted to take pictures of things and make things discoverable and leverage this capability that was in all of our pockets. So, my belief was we could reimagine local commerce as we know it if we just, focused on a lot of the pain points in that. So that was the very beginning for me. It was, a selfish, I guess, need. And I really just started thinking about, how do things work in the world today? And then how can we do it differently? So spent a lot of time, I think, sketching and kind of reimagining, what I thought could be what is, ultimately, OfferUp today.
Awesome. And a little bit more, how does it work? So, I would imagine that I have something to sell or I want to get rid of something. I post photos of it. I post it onto the platform. What do people see on the other side? I can then search for whatever I'm looking for. Is it only local, or what are kind of your options there from the user experience?
Yeah, so people use OfferUp in various ways. You can, at this point, you can pretty much buy and sell anything on OfferUp. So we have billions of dollars in monthly transactions that occur, and people are selling everything from bikes to strollers, workout equipment, home goods, cars. We sell quite a few cars on the platform. But it was designed to be, from a seller standpoint, it was designed to be as easy as just taking and sharing a photo. So, I could sit here in this room and just take a picture of something pretty quickly, and at least tell people that it's discoverable. So that was a big point of friction in the past. And then from the buyer standpoint, it was designed to be kind of like a treasure hunt. Yes, you can search for things, but you'll notice when you open up the app, we're showing you a series of pictures of things that people are selling all around you. And that was very intentional. I just wanted to, visualize what was in, garages down the street, or visualize what was in a store down the street. And so it was designed to be very engaging and very, picture based, from the beginning. We also have introduced shipping, and that was something we built in 2018. But again, the goal in doing that was to help reduce friction. And so, yes, you can buy and sell from across the country, but there's quite a few times where I've been buying shoes lately. I've bought, some brand new shoes from a seller in Seattle, and I live about half hour away. So for $5, I could have the shoes, delivered to me the very next day. So we offer a series of different, types of features, but they're all under the umbrella of reducing friction, right? Really making it a simple experience for buyers and sellers.
Right. And I know I mentioned in reading your bio, largest mobile marketplace in the US. How many buyers and sellers are actually on the platform today?
Yeah, so as you mentioned in the beginning, we have over 44 million annual users that engage on the platform. Our average customer uses OfferUp like 3 times a day, every other day of the month. So people engage in OfferUp quite a bit differently, I think, than other marketplaces. Like, it becomes part of their daily lives. Periodically they'll just be browsing and looking for things, and that they're not always there to say, "Hey, I need X." They're kind of engaging it sometimes more like social content. Some of the things in this room, for example, that a lot of things you see here, I bought on OfferUp, but I wasn't looking for that chair or that pillow or that lamp. I just happened to be browsing one day when I was bored, and discovered those things and and bought those all locally. So that's part of the design of the product.
It's great. And I know um, that you purchase a lot of things both for your home and your office that you find on OfferUp, which is great. For those of you that don't know, you can hashtag in Twitter OfferUp finds, correct? And Nick's OfferUp finds, which will show some of the things that the company has bought on the platform, which is great. Do you remember your first purchase on OfferUp?
Yes, I can see it from here. It's my bedroom's over there. It's a Pottery Barn bench that I think would normally retail for probably $400 or $500, and I paid $100 for it.
Amazing.
The seller was moving, and they didn't want it in their new house. I think it was one of the very first things I bought. But yeah, you're right. I'd say a good chunk of my house is furnished from OfferUp, and 100% of our office, pretty much, except for maybe some of the computer equipment, is entirely from OfferUp. So
Very cool. Okay, we're going to get a little bit more into obviously COVID, which is very top of mind for everyone still, but just more about keeping perspective. You've experienced a lot in doing business. This is your third economic crisis that you've been doing business in. So first the dot-com market crash of 2001, then the housing crisis of 2008, and now obviously the impact of COVID-19. So can you share a little bit more about what you've learned during those first two downturns and how that's helping you navigate running a business today?
yeah, I guess first of all, I think a lot of people are clearly struggling, and I think it's going to be this way, unfortunately, for a while. So, I feel, empathetic for, I think a lot of the challenges that typically occur during, moments, like this. So, I think that, in some ways, these kind of shifts and these moments create resilience. I think they really pull out the best in people, and people figure out a way to persevere and power through. And and maybe it's just age and wisdom, but I think when I experienced the dot-com crash, I was fresh out of school. I had no savings. I was down to eating chili and top ramen, and too proud to move back in with my dad. And it was a really hard time, and I thought the world was over. Like, I didn't have perspective on anything. I thought the world was against me. It really had nothing to do with me. So I had to, adapt and figure out new ways to, I think, kind of fight forward. Because I didn't have income for a while. It was really a challenging time. But now, again, looking back at that, I think I realized that, I can persevere. I think I'm stronger, having lived through that. Started a company, around the same time. And so that was challenging, trying to raise money and do all that. And then, of course, time goes on. I've worked at a few other companies between, the dot-com crash and then the housing crisis. But I started OfferUp at the tail end, right around the housing crisis. So not a great time again to start a company. Not a lot of people funding companies. But I think sometimes when you have ideas and you can't get them out of your head, my best advice to anybody is just do it. I think there's a lot of people that have ideas, and I think most just won't take the time or focus on it enough. So I'm very happy that we started OfferUp when we did. I think that's a very hard part for companies that trying to time markets. I think the best thing to do is just really focus on doing that. So yeah, I think again for me, what I have learned, I think through that is the ability to look past things and the ability to think about the long-term picture and think about the future. And when you focus really far out and visualize what that future looks like, in my mind, it makes the challenges of the week, the day, or even the year. It just makes them, I guess, less severe, right? They just don't seem as challenging. So that's one thing I think I learned. I think the other thing, it was just taking care of yourself. I was just in, I think, a bad spot where I wasn't healthy. And I just decided, like, look, I think my mental and physical health matters. So just being physically active, I think, is a great way to reduce stress, a great way to just have focused time and visualize where you want to go. So now I make physical activity a pretty much part of my daily routine. And I've been doing that now for, I don't know, almost 20 years. So those are things I think I've learned, and unfortunately the hard way. But I think
Yeah.
I'm hopefully just a little calmer now as things get crazy, having kind of lived through that.
Yeah. It's often one of the best ways to do it, right? Getting on that, just you've spoken about, the importance of health and prioritizing that. And for you, it's working out, right? Or exercising, which is great. But any tips for people listening in? Like, what made you start exercising, and how do you kind of prioritize that when you have so many uncertainties and so many things, competing priorities around you in your day, especially during harder times like this? Oftentimes people would probably argue that it's harder to get that workout in. So what are some tips you have that actually make you, jump the gun, cross the line, and actually start and do it?
Yeah, I think, for me, I got out of college. I wasn't really working out for a year or so, and I was super stressed. I wasn't sleeping well. And one day I'm like, look, I'm just banging my head against a wall. Like, something has to change here. And so I just said, look, I'm going to start going to the gym or something. And literally within a week or two, like, I'm sleeping through the night. I'm just feeling better about everything. And that was a pretty big shift for me. So I went from completely neglecting it to really, embracing it. And so I think for me now, like, I just get honestly cranky if I don't do something every few days. Like, I really alters my mood. So, I'm pretty clear with my team and those that now own my calendar that, my time for me in the morning is sacred. It's very rare exceptions when you can take that away. But for the most part, they know just not to block it. Like, don't mess with it. It's my time for me, because, like I said, the rest of my day is pretty much booked, and I'm doing various other things for other people. But that's one thing I've tried to be very clear on, and mostly disciplined on. Every now and then, those be certain meetings or a board meeting, for example, that I can't miss. But
Sure.
for the most part, I'm pretty disciplined about it.
Awesome. And then another thing you talked about briefly is kind of longer term visualization. So I know you mentioned that as part of your perseverance or part of something that's worked for you. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's kind of twisted, but I always think about. I always have this visual of me like having coffee at like 60 years old, and just sitting there in the morning and kind of reflecting on what I've accomplished. And just a lot to do. And I think that, life is short and there's a lot of things I'd love to do in this life. And so I think that's a helpful tool for me because it really, in my mind, creates urgency and it creates accountability for myself. And so I try to, put that pressure on myself to say, hey, there's a lot you want to do, and so there's no time to wait. So don't waste today. Like don't waste today. Get up and focus. I write kind of every day. I have my own little kind of journal or my thoughts. I write everything on a piece of paper. For the most part, I'm very digital, but like this is an important part of my day. Getting very clear on not just the to-do list. Everyone has the to-do list. But if you think about that, it's like, fold my laundry. Like it's not really game changing. So I try to remind myself on, every day kind of like what matters. Like, are you really moving the needle on the things that you want to do in your life versus just letting kind of the to-do list of today kind of take over. So that's a big part of how I kind of connect the dots.
Great. Thank you. Recently, you guys raised $120 million and acquired LetGo. What are your plans moving forward, and why was this the right time to go through with that deal? I imagine there must have been some uncertainty or some questioning around that. So why now, and what's to come?
Yeah, I mean, we're clearly, I think the opportunity in the U.S., it's a really big market, and we focused on, the top, historically, kind of the top 30 markets in the country, the top 30 DMAs, and got, very, very large, very quick there. And when we thought about LetGo, they had, a lot of different synergies. They had a lot of growth in markets where we weren't necessarily the largest. And we thought that was a great way to continue to grow in those markets. We also thought that it would just benefit not only their customers and our customers. We just thought combined the marketplace would be much larger. And so that was really a lot of the synergies that we were talking about together. And then on top of that, like we could have never predicted COVID, that's for sure. And unfortunately, that happened for a lot of people. But at the same time, we saw a lot of positive growth and momentum in our own marketplace. I think a lot of people are turning to marketplaces like LetGo and OfferUp during this time because they need things, they need supplies, and a lot of places are closed. So I think we are becoming a resource for people in a time of need. And it's also helpful again with new capital. I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities and things that we can invest in, during this time, so we can help people or accelerate, a lot of product innovation that we want to do.
Yeah, it's also obviously a much more budget-friendly option, right? When people are hunkering down on spending and kind of budget saving too.
Yeah.
Looking a little bit more at the company internally, how have you guys shifted your perspective on building company culture? Like, I'm curious how you're interacting with your team in new ways, obviously over virtual, but what are some things that you've done since COVID hit that you've seen positive results?
Yeah, it's I would say that this is a really interesting social experiment. So I've always been, well, somewhat hesitant, I'd say, in the last year or so of moving quickly to a more remote environment. And part of it is, when you're a small growing company, there's still a lot to be figured out. Like your culture is still, I always say, like the paint is still wet. Like we can talk about values and principles, but it takes a while to build that muscle when you're hiring new people and making sure that they're the right people and they're reinforcing that type of culture. So whether I liked it or not, COVID hit and we all had to adapt. And I think it's been a really interesting experiment where we've seen communication and productivity increasing, and I would have assumed the inverse.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's pros and cons to this kind of remote work, but what I found interesting about it is people have more kind of when they engage with their coworkers, it's just a different level of engagement. Like you can see in my house, you can see my family. In fact, my son just ran by crying. I thought he was going to run in here. But my point is, you get to connect with people on a different level, and that's very true. Every 2 weeks, for example, we do executive happy hours. Just a Zoom call. Sometimes we have a drink. We don't talk about work. We just get to know each other. We never did that pre-COVID. Like we never met that much. And so we're just
Yeah.
finding more ways to connect. And yeah, you're not there face to face, but you have an intentional time together, and it's a little bit different. Um, I think people are feeling more productive because um, their time is a little bit more optimized in the day, right? So they don't have to, they're just very focused on the work, and they're at home and they're not distracted. We have a very open office environment, which is good for many, but if you're a developer, you hate that. Like you just want to
Right.
sit down and focus, and you don't want a lot of that distraction there. Um, I think the other learnings and things we've tried, there's a plug into Slack called Donuts, which is really interesting, and it's basically speed dating. So we've been hiring a bunch of people during this time. A lot of people have never even seen our office, which is kind of bizarre. And so we said, well, how can we stay connected? So what this app essentially does is it's randomly connects you with various people, and you do a 30-minute phone call, and you get to know each other. So we've been doing that. In fact, after this call today, I have a donut call with somebody who I've never met. Um, so there are different ways I think that we're finding to stay connected. I think the fact that people don't have to commute is a big
Oh, yeah.
relief and stress relief, and so I think people enjoy that as well. I think the downsides of this are really that camaraderie, and when can how can you meet face to face, and when can we go back to the office? So we're trying to be very thoughtful on what that actually looks like when you come back to the office, and it's probably going to be different than what it is today. And so
Yeah.
um, if you ask me today what it looks like in the future, I'd say it's probably some kind of a hybrid, right? I think there are positives to working remote, and there are positives being in the office. But we probably won't go back to exactly the same setup that we had before.
Sure.
So yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, I love your theory about the paint still wet, right? Or the wet paint. I think that's something that, I really value culture too, but as you scale and as you grow, obviously culture changes and what that means. But any tips for onboarding later stage employees, not necessarily now while you're doing it remote, but ensuring that they still feel that kind of wet paint mentality, like they feel that scrappy startup feeling. And that's often experienced or just kind of comes naturally at like a younger, smaller company. So how do you guys try and maintain that culture as you get larger and as your team grows?
I mean, that's a good question. I think that is one challenge. We've hired quite a few people, as I mentioned, that have never been in the office before. So, we've had a few kind of random ideas that others in the company have thought of. We've had a few managers now that have just been opening up say a Zoom meeting with no agenda, no nothing, with new hires, and they'll just have them there on a screen. So you're simulating essentially you're sitting there in the office, but you're really not. Or they'll do a team meeting at 2 o'clock, let's say, and the whole team will be on there. But there's no meeting. It's just essentially simulating working together and having
White
that. So
noise.
you just randomly chat about things, whatever. So I think those are ways that people are adapting. Um, we always heavily encourage people to use the product. In fact, that is the one thing I'd say in general, our culture is very neighborly. But if you're not using our product, you're going to get an earful from me or others. And so that is one way to kind of continue to reinforce that customer obsession and that mindset is, there's no reason that everybody shouldn't at least be using OfferUp to buy or sell something. So, as a new employee, we really push that pretty heavily. I try to check in and, I applaud people. I mean, there's a way that we track that, and we can show that on this in the office. We have this reader board on who's buying and selling what. But I think, that's another way again to bring people into the culture is just look, use the product, get feedback, tell people how we can make it better.
Sure.
But I do think, to your point, I think shaping culture becomes a little harder when you're remote. There's certain things you just can't see that are happening. In the office, you see it, and it's a little bit harder when you're in this type of environment. So that'll be one thing as we continue to spend more time in this mode that we'll be, I think, very thoughtful about.
Yeah, something to come. A little bit more about connecting local communities, which I know is really important for you guys, and you often speak about the responsibility you feel for connecting local communities. How has this changed during COVID?
Yeah, it's really kind of interesting as we look at some of the trends and how people have been using OfferUp. Like you'd think right now, no one would be buying a car, but that's a lot of people are buying cars, and you look at some of the how how is this happening and why is this happening, and so if you look at like a lot of our auto dealers that are using OfferUp, they're just adapting on how they're engaging with their customers. So if you're interested in buying a Honda Accord, for example, you call the dealership and they'll do most of the work on the phone with you. We've even seen dealerships that say, okay, great, you bought your car, we're going to come drop it off to you. So, they'll roll up to the driveway, pull out the keys, wave at you through the window, put the keys on the mat, and there you go. You purchased a car. So I think, people are finding ways to adapt. We see a lot more shipping activity. Our shipping business is up like 60% since COVID started. We see people doing a lot. I think they're doing generally pretty good, but with porch pickups and things like that, where I know I've done that, and same thing. Or I say I'll just go leave my chair out and on the mat, and they just somebody will wave at me, with money in their hand and leave it under the mat and take the item. So I think people need things, and when supply is constrained, there's a lot of it on OfferUp, and so people are turning to OfferUp to not only get value, but sometimes simply just to get what they need. But huge increases in certain categories. Like a good example is puzzles. Puzzles are up 1,000% since
Oh
COVID
yeah.
started. So if you're selling puzzles, it is a seller's market. Like you should keep that in mind. Video games is up like 300%. Exercise equipment up like 130%. So my feedback to anybody selling right now is it's a seller's market. So know that, and if you're buying something, I wouldn't negotiate very heavily because get in line. There's a lot of people that are
Yeah.
looking for the same type of stuff.
A lot of demand.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you guys just recently released your annual re-commerce report, right, which dives deeper into kind of the buyer and seller behaviors, right, in resale. So I'm curious, like what items you already mentioned, workout equipment, puzzles, what items are selling now? Anything else you're seeing more trends that before than from before COVID?
Yeah, definitely workouts, things at home, right? With home goods is a large category and offer. Furniture is way up. Um, computer equipment is up like 200%.
Mm.
Video games, I think as parents, I have two kids. Like, yes, they have school and they're busy during the day, but you got to keep them busy, especially if you're a working parent. So I think video games are up like 300%. Uh, you know, Bikes and outdoor equipment, all those categories are up pretty heavily because again, people are home and they're trying to stay active. And so I think, those have been all great to see. We've also been seeing, I think, what's been pretty amazing is just I think the overall kindness and understanding in people. So we're seeing a lot more of just hearing more anecdotal stories of how people are helping each other during this time where people are just giving away things. I'm giving away my kids' books, or I'm giving away a bicycle or a toy. I think that's really great to see when people just say, hey, even if it was listed at a certain price, and then they go meet the buyer and they say, look, you need this more than me, and they just end up giving it away. So I think it always feels good to hear those stories and how people are helping each other right now.
Yeah, it's amazing and great to hear, especially during this time, right?
Yeah.
It seemed like this year, this is something you guys publish annually, right? But this year it sounded like you decided to put more of a focus on parents and kids. Is that related to COVID, or is there any other particular reason of why that was more of a focus than past years?
Yeah, I mean, every year we write this and we just want to understand, how is OfferUp impacting the world? How are we impacting, the earth that we're all on? And but I think in this year in particular, given COVID and given some of the challenges, I think for parents out there, and we just spend a little bit more time understanding what they're dealing with, because I think, the stress levels as a parent trying to I empathize, especially with my wife. Like I'm somewhat lucky. I can lock the door to my den and get work done, but she's still working. She is now also their teacher. She is now their lunch lady. Like she is doing triple duty right now, and it makes things extremely, challenging. So we wanted to try to understand those impacts, and then how is that changing their behavior and what they're buying or selling, because that's another very common activity right now, again, as we think about what are their needs. So that was why we spent more time particularly on this segment for now.
Sure. Anything else in the report we can look forward to, or anything else you want to share about it?
I think that's mostly it at a high level. I'd say just, if you're curious on just overall trends and things that we've learned and how are parents adapting, it's a pretty extensive report. If you don't like to read heavily, the good thing is there's lots of pictures and lots of charts, so it's not it's not a long read, but I think it's very kind of educational. We put a lot of work into it to hopefully help people kind of understand kind of what's happening out there in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those that are interested in reading kind of the full report, it is available on the OfferUp blog, and it's also something that we'll be sharing with attendees post webinar, so they can have easy access to it to scan and see what other stats that they can find. All right, so we are out of our time, and so everyone in the audience, get your questions ready. We do have some questions that some attendees sent in advance that we can run through, but obviously the chat is there as well, so I want to make sure we get your questions answered about OfferUp, about Nick's journey, about anything else you want to know about perseverance or grit. But something that I personally love to do when I have the pleasure of interviewing some of our speakers is just kind of a rapid fire getting to know you round. So the point or the objective here is to share the quickest and kind of the first thought that comes to your mind. So there's no wrong answers. We really just want to get to know a little bit more about you, a little bit more about some of your preferences or some of your favorite things. So as fast as you can.
This could be dangerous. This could be dangerous.
First things that comes to mind. We'll go easy on you. All right? Are you ready?
Let's go.
All right. What's the last book you read?
A $1 Billion Whale.
Who's a person that inspires you? Can be real or fictional.
Richard Branson. That guy lives life to the fullest, not only in business, but also personally.
What's your favorite thing to do with your kids?
We ride our bikes a lot, and we also have a huge spring-free trampoline that we bought on OfferUp in our backyard. And most days we go out there and jump around in that thing. So that's fun.
Awesome. Hardest thing about working from home and sheltering in place right now?
Well, I was just experiencing it while we were chatting. My son came by crying at the window a few times. So that makes it difficult when you're trying to work and be focused when you have those distractions sometimes.
Yeah. Your favorite workout?
I get bored easily, so I mix it up. I don't really have a favorite. I'm not even that, honestly, it's sad, but I'm not even that thoughtful about, I just kind of go in there and plan it out as I go. And I know what what different muscles I've done recently. So I just kind of, I mix it up. I don't really have a favorite.
What's the last workout you did?
I did jump rope and legs and shoulders yesterday. I jump out. My garage is transformed into my gym, but I also use the jump rope in my driveway. So it's interesting. My neighbors walk by all the time, and I'm out there just working out in my driveway, which is kind of funny.
Yeah. Proud day or moment at OfferUp. Doesn't need to be the biggest, but just kind of the first one that comes to your mind.
I met a woman once. This was a long time ago, and we were pretty early. We didn't have a lot of traction, not a lot of users. And I showed up to her house to buy something for our office. And she gets to chatting with me, and I didn't tell her who I was. And then finally it came out, and the kids are watching TV. The dad is. They turn the TV off, and they invite me into their house. And I come in and I sit down. I have coffee with them, and she tells me her story on how OfferUp saved her family, and it basically is paying the bills and putting the grocery on the table. Her husband got in a serious, had an illness, and she just started liquidating the things that she owned. She had sold $60,000 worth of stuff on OfferUp. And the whole family, the son was like, yeah, I used to think my mom was crazy. She told me about this app. I'm like, this is a waste of time. And it's like a year later, and now OfferUp is just such a huge part of their life. So that's when I was pretty proud of what we had built. And then I realized that, heck, if this woman can sell $60,000 worth of stuff, then anybody could do this. And that was only a few years in our existence. So that moment stuck with me. And so I thought that was great.
Oh, that's great. You've talked a lot about some of the unique or some purchases in your house and in your office, but what would you say is the most unique purchase, or maybe one of the weirdest purchases that either you've purchased or that you've just seen on the app or the platform?
So this painting
That's hard.
here, I'm just going to zoom in on that. So I love this thing. My wife hates it. I don't know. I mean, I like it a lot. So that is weird. A lot of people I think it's you either like it or you don't. Uh, so
Conversation starter though.
that's right. So that's probably one of the, I don't know, more interesting pieces I bought.
Awesome. Well, that's it. You survived. So well done, and thanks
Oh,
for that.
okay.
Thanks. Okay, we've got a couple questions from the audience we are going to run through. So we've got about 10 minutes for questions again. Chat your questions in. We have a few that have come in so far. But first, let's get to some that folks submitted in advance. So one of the questions is, what was one thing or more that you wish you knew before you got started?
Oh, the time of everything. I think what you realize when you build something is it takes way longer than you think. And trying to set those expectations, especially I think with my wife. I mean, I had no income the first year. My wife was working. I had a daughter now, and it was always one of those of like, okay, well, when's this really going to take off? Well, I don't know, right? And so I think just knowing that it takes way longer and you better really be passionate about what you're building. I think that was a big one. I think the other one is the people and trying to make sure you're bringing the right people along with you on the journey. That is really hard. Finding a good co-founder, finding your first, 10 people to add to your team. I think that is super hard. And so I spend more time on that. I think the last one is just networking, and it sounds weird and broad, but I'm just amazed how few people do it really well. And I think that it is inefficient. It's a big time suck, but I just believe in life. Like you need to connect as many people as you can because you don't know who's going to say yes to you. You don't know which of those meetings is going to turn into something else. So, I used to spend probably over half my time networking. I would go to every event, any coffee I could do, I would do. And it is kind of inefficient, but ultimately, if you do that enough, it's a game of numbers. You will find an investor. You will find, a developer to come in and help you with something. So those are a few tips I'd think about.
Yeah. And you never know when those people are going to come back, right? You might get the no first, but then 5 years later down the line, things change and it could be different, right?
Oh, most definitely. Yeah.
Um, Someone said, congrats on your continued success. Where do you go for inspiration?
The internet. That's where I go for most things. But yeah, I mean, I tend to read a lot of biographies and those inspire me. I like to hear the stories because I think a lot of times, if you read simply just a headline or an article, it masks what it actually took to get there. And so I read a lot of biographies and you get into the darkest moments of people's journey and you realize how they persevered through those moments. Anyone I think that has been, that is in a pretty, impactful, I guess position in their life or is, seen as being super successful. They've all had those challenges along the way. So I like to understand how they navigate those. And then fortunately where I live kind of out in the woods. I find a lot of inspiration in nature. I just like to get out and turn everything off sometimes and just think for myself. So I go for a lot of walks and that's always good.
Right. You answered some of this, so I'm not sure how much more you can share, but what are your plans with LetGo and the two brands and platforms merging together?
Yeah, so
I
that's a
guess.
great question. So, we want to be very thoughtful about how we bring these marketplaces together. We have, a large user base. They have a large user base. So, we don't have a specific timeline on how we are going to best kind of, bring these marketplaces together. But we are spending a lot of time with their team and our team, planning and thinking about, what is the optimal way and the easiest way for customers to kind of move on to a single platform. So that'll take time. Like that, we're not just flicking a switch and having it happen, but we're going to be very thoughtful on how we kind of navigate through those changes.
Great. Question from the audience. How do you see emerging technologies impacting third-party marketplaces in the present with COVID and in the future for OfferUp?
Another good question. So, I think things are definitely going to evolve. I think if I understand the question correctly, I mean, I think the whole landscape of commerce is going to shift. I think unfortunately for, a lot of the larger retailers, they're clearly, struggling with this right now. But I think you're going to just see more e-commerce in general. I think you're going to see more people being willing to try different platforms. I think shipping will continue to grow. I think, we'll find more ways to reduce friction with local commerce and get things to people when they want those things. I think that's going to shift in a pretty material way. So I think we're still in the early days of this. And I unfortunately think this is going to take a while before things really fully get back to a new normal. Right now we're in the COVID normal, I guess. Yeah, I think I think definitely new things will emerge out of this without question. But I think we're still in a kind of a state where everyone's trying to figure out what that's going to look like.
Yeah, I'm still kind of bracing for impact. Another question, what advice do you have for startup founders about keeping morale high while the company is navigating Corona and working remotely?
I think the biggest advice and biggest learning is just be transparent and communicate a lot. We used to do all hands with the whole company once a month. We do it every week, every Friday, and so it's not as big of a splash. It's a little bit more informal, but the same kind of standard points and things that we talk about. We celebrate wins. We try to bring and we try to be kind of that connective tissue that says, okay, bringing visibility into other pockets of the business. So I think a challenge with being separated is I think teams are gelling well together, but it's more of what's happening in that team over there, or I don't know what's happening over here. So that is something that we're constantly trying to do. I've been writing more blogs. I've been communicating more. I started doing roundtables. And so, in the next week, I will have done roundtables with the entire company and in a small pockets at a time, so people can ask questions. What's top of mind for me? What are concerns? What are people navigating when they're at home, and how can we be helpful there? So, I think it's just taking that time because you are given back time. You don't have to be commuting all the time, and that you are saving some time in the day, but don't consider that. I consider that time to find new ways to stay connected. And so I think we've been overly indexing very heavily on that. And the feedback from the team so far in roundtables it's definitely been noticed. Like the general feedback I'm getting is we're communicating way better than we ever have. And people understand where we're going as a company way better than they ever have. Which again is weird because we're not in the office. So you think it'd be the opposite, but
right.
Again, I think it's just because we're doing various things to kind of reinforce and be open to communication.
Yeah. And those are probably some of the things you guys will continue to practice, right? When this new normal settles in, but kind of that over communication are some of these things that you might not have thought about before, but you realize now are beneficial.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. And I think this is our last question. So you mentioned networking and how important it is to you and how helpful it's been. Any tips on networking during COVID or networking virtually?
Unfortunately, I don't have a good answer to this one because I don't spend a lot of time networking. I definitely don't. There might be online sources for that. I have no idea, honestly. But I definitely think it is a challenge during this time to get out and be connected. That is one of the downsides for sure. So, fortunately, I don't have a good answer to that one.
No worries. Something we have seen a little bit is just, with virtual events and virtual podcasts and webinars being more popular, people are actually more willing to to participate, to sign up, to listen in than they probably would have. And there's a lot of reasons, right? They've got more time seemingly because they're at home. They might be a little bit more willing to invest in it because it's less time intensive, or it's less of a time investment for you to be able to, jump onto a webinar versus have to travel to an event. So that's definitely a couple things that we're seeing just in terms of trends for networking virtually is, you've got less to lose. So you might as well try it. But you've talked a little bit about it too, just networking. Networking can be with your team, jumping on casually for roundtables or for just saying hello and popping up to see what somebody's working on, or just to have some background noise in, and have more conversations with employees. So um, that is everything that we wanted to get through today, and we're out of time. So Nick, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. It was great to get to know you, to learn a little bit more about the platform, some of your unique purchases on OfferUp, and also just some of your tips on perseverance. So thanks so much again. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me and enjoyed the time.
Yeah. Everyone check out OfferUp's platform if you haven't already. Be sure to download to see what finds you can search for, or what you can potentially have in your home or your office. And be sure to follow them on Twitter so you can see some of the finds that Nick finds or that they purchase for their office. So thanks again, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.